Hi there, welcome to another episode of Top Dice. You may notice Aid's not with me, so I can do what I like. Now, I've decided to invite a couple of friends with me, and we have Steve, Alan,
Hello.
Max.
Hey,
He's new to all this. So, start with you, Steve. What have you been doing, sort of role-playing wise, recently? What's going on with you?
At the moment, it's just a lot of reading and writing of WFRP. That's the main game I want to be running once I get settled in Warwickshire. So yes, I've just been doing that really, and then hopefully I'll set a group up and I'll get on with some gaming.
Excellent, Alan.
So I've recently been playing a lot of Savage Worlds. We're in a quite a long running fantasy game at the moment, and we alternate that with some East Texas University, which is a brilliant setting, totally different from other things that you might have played. And I'm running a science fiction Savage Worlds game, but also recently got into Castles and Crusades. Started reading that because we're distributing for Troll Lord Games. Started reading it, thought, yeah, I could get into this, and ran a first session of that last week, and that's gone really well as well. So yeah, quite a few different things going on.
So with the distribution, is that going to plan? The last video you did. Any updates on that you'd like to share, or?
There's a major update I would love to share, but I can't because the publisher that we've been in talks with for 3 months haven't given us what we need just yet.
Okay.
So we're really hoping that comes off. But we've got Troll Lord Games on board, so we've got Castles and Crusades. We've got Acheron Games on board, so we've got what's it called? Lex Arcanum, is it? Or Lex Romanus or something like that. Forgive me for not knowing that one off the top of my head. We've just signed up Gaxland, so we're going to have a load of Heidi Gygax's D&D modules. We'll have those Friday of this week. And our relationship with Pinnacle just keeps on getting stronger, so we've now got over 100 Savage Worlds lines in the UK.
And all this will be available at the UK Games Expo. I'm assuming.
Certainly will, yeah. So this year, because you have to book your space at Expo, 11 months in advance. This year, most of that stuff will be on the Britannia Games stand in Hall 1. We're right next to Free League. And we've got a fairly big stand, and all that stuff's going to be there on the Britannia Games stand, along with Steve's Chivalry and Sorcery and things like that as well. Next year we're going to have a very, very big stand. It's going to be all GMS branded.
Excellent. So please, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Please like and subscribe. Grow the channel. So the more keen-eyed amongst us will have noticed a new face, Max. Welcome aboard.
hello.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself regarding sort of yourself and role playing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently in between sort of games. My previous campaign that I was running kind of fizzled out, unfortunately. But we still want to play with that group. That's a group in Poland that we play over Discord. But currently, I'm trying to figure out when can I get my co-workers from my research group to play some role playing, because I know a lot of them haven't played any, but they're all keen because obviously it's much more trendy now and much more in the main than it used to be. So I recently actually got the D&D third edition Orange starter set, which is what I really kind of started with back in 2001 or 2 when I was 10 years old. So I got that in English this time, not in Polish. And I would like to run it because I think it's some of my keenest and funniest memories of playing role-playing games was with this box for sure. So I would like that to kind of share it with people who have never played again, because I think it's quite a good box set. I think it plays quite well, and it's quite good at getting people involved quite quickly. It's easy to play. So that's currently what I'm into right now. I've also got tons of other things. Obviously, everybody's got like their own things going on. You try
Right.
to design games, you try to design adventures. That's obviously going on in the back of my head constantly as well.
Excellent. Everyone who's been on the show gets asked this. I'm just going to throw it at you. I think the other two know what's coming. What are your 3 favorite role-playing games?
Okay, so I don't have that much experience with different role-playing games. So I played vast majority of RPGs I played were some sort of version of D&D.
Yeah.
So to me, my favorite D&D edition is 3.5. I could 3 as well. I like 5. I actually don't think 4 was that bad. I think they all have a specific thing that they tried to do. And if you look at it from the perspective of them trying to do a thing, I think they all kind of succeeded. Maybe apart from 4, because people just didn't like what the was trying to do. And then I have big kind of, if you ask anybody from Poland, the first edition Warhammer is a huge, massive thing in Poland. It was,
Okay, that's cool.
yeah, it was the first. It was the first, almost. I believe it was the very first properly released RPG game in Poland. It had a relatively good translation, and it was a single book, which made it very affordable for people back in the 90s in Poland.
That's
So
cool.
I got a kind of, have to admit, I have a photocopied version back in Poland, but right here upstairs in my place here in Liverpool, I have a charity shop find for £5
Oh,
several years ago in Edinburgh that I just walked past, and it was right there in the window, and I was like, oh my god. I
yeah.
actually I met Tony Ackland, who's the illustrator for most of it, last year at a wargaming event, and we had a chat about the first edition Warhammer. He got very excited. I got very excited, obviously. So yeah, so definitely Warhammer first edition. And there is another game that's kind of, I've never really played properly, because when it came out, I was just starting with role-playing games, and it kind of fizzled out quite fast in Poland. And it's the original 2002, I believe, Witcher RPG. That's the one that was designed in Poland, not the sort of the new one that's based on, I believe it's run on the same system as Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
It's the Pondsmith one. So it's not this one, it's the 2002. Now that game is quite widely panned for its mechanics. I agree, it's kind of cluttery. It tried to do a lot of things. It tried to be like an introductory things for Polish RPGs. It came out at the same time as the original Polish Witcher TV show, which is also bad. So there was a lot of things that compiled, but the actual book is beautiful. It's illustrated by a fantastic illustrator, Polish illustrator, Mr. Musiał, and it has a fantastic game master section, absolutely brilliant game master section with advice on how to run games. And I think it's well worth reading it nowadays, even because it talks about things that's on one hand quite crunchy. Sort of, for example, it gives a whole chapter about things like what does a human notice first when they walk into the room, and it tells you how you could use that to describe what the PCs see. So it starts from movement, through colors, through big shapes, small shapes, smells, and so forth. So it's very useful, and it kind of, I remember reading for the first time, and I was really impressed when I was young. So yes, I would say these 3. There are probably others as well, but these 3 for sure.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Quite different, actually, but that makes a lot of sense. Poland was quite hard to get hold of role-playing games. I'm assuming.
Oh yeah.
Back then, yeah. Right then. Okay then. Thank you for sharing that. What we're going to do next is something a little bit strange and different. We have a topic, or we have a choice of 4 topics. We're going to choose randomly which one they are. Which one it is. Nobody knows what it's going to be, so I shall roll the dice.
Can somebody do a drum roll here?
Yep. Are we going to do a drum roll? And the winner is You'll have to take my word for this. It's a 3. They're all numbered. So number 3 now is the topic. Right. What 3 things have been an influence on how you write, run, and play role-playing games? I know. It's a weird and big one, that one. So, any volunteers who wants to go first, or Steve, would you like to take?
How did you know I was getting picked on? Yeah, 3 influences. Yeah, first one is obviously I do read a lot of novels. I do read a lot of books. So like, I mean, I've got quite like a eclectic mix of stuff I read. So I mean, I read bit of like history fiction, and then obviously fancy novels and things like that. So if I'm there reading and I see something, I think, oh, I can pick that bit out and put that in and that. So TV series and films, even back from like sort of like the 80s and things like the terrible 80s fantasy movies, and like the first ever fancy thing I ever watched was the animated Lord of the Rings film. John Hurt did sort of like Aragorn. He was his voice, like. So even going back as far as that, like and watching that and watching different TVs, watching The Witcher and looking at things like that. But in recent years, I'm actually going to name people actually. So I hope I don't get done for copyright for this here. My main sort of influences in recent years have been actually people who've ran games for me. So there's a guy who is originally from Telford. So he's not originally from Telford. He lives in Telford, but he plays his games in Cannock. And he's a guy called Lewis Griffiths. He's made some really, really good homebrew stuff. And he's ran some really good games of D&D, Spycraft, things like that. Like actually sitting in the game with him was an absolute honour and pleasure. Just sort of sitting there and listening, and you're making little notes, think, oh, I'm going to put that in, and I'm going to sort of like run that bit like that, and and try and get the players involved in that. And there's another guy, probably my biggest inspiration really for when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it's a guy called Richard Bryce Nye. He moved up to the Midlands area for about 5 years, but he moved back to Exeter, or that way on. But probably one of the best GMs of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that I've ever played with. And it's not just me, there's a lot of people who probably say the same. So if I can sort of like GM half as good as him with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I would be so happy. So there's my 3.
Excellent. Quite an interesting mix. Am I going to have to pick one of you two?
I'll go. Okay, so do you know what I'm going to do? Just give me 1 second, because I'm just going to go back and review the question. 3 things that influence on how you write, run, and play RPGs. So, an influence on how I write. I think. So I got into Savage Worlds in probably 2005, 2006 or something like that, when it was still quite young. What I liked about it is how concise the rules are and things like that. There's no waffle. It's just kind of, this is how it is. And so when I started writing, I've got the Pinnacle style guide for writing, and I look at that and think, well, yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense. So, and it makes sense to me personally as well. I've always been that kind of person of, say it as it is, because there's not much point in waffling and dancing around a subject. So say it how it is, job done. And I think that influences the way that I write. But another influence on the way that I write is fantasy author David Gemmell. I'm a huge fan of David Gemmell, and just again, I think going back to the conciseness, he can describe a scene with very few words, and and yet you're in absolutely no doubt as to what's happened or what's gone on, or you've got all the triggers that you need in your head to play that scene out. So as a writer, I would say that is that's kind of where I'm at. As a player, I'm kind of with Steve. I think you do get influenced by the good GMs that you play with,
Oh,
and
definitely.
you play in a game and it's memorable. And we were having a conversation about this off screen earlier on, weren't we? About how your long lasting friends. I've been gaming for over 40 years now, and some of my oldest friends are gamers, and we still talk about those particular things. And the GM that runs those scenarios has got to be an influence on you as a game master. You pick up on things like that when you're so engaged as a player. You realize how do you want to do that. So I'm not gonna call people out the way Steve did, but there are 3 or 4 GMs that I've played with over the years, and I'm pleased to say one of them is my current GM. When I'm not running a game myself, the current GM I'm with is brilliant at getting people engaged, at setting the scene, and at making sure everybody gets a little bit of table time as well. Everybody's got that kind of on-screen moment, for want of a better phrase, and that definitely influences me as a player and as a GM as well. So how to run games. Yeah, you look at how other people do it, and I've worked in sales for many, many years, and one of the little maxims that I have in sales is that people quite often don't know what they want until you show them what they don't want. So seeing a GM who's doing it badly can show you exactly what not to do, and that is a great thing as well. Unfortunately, there are some GMs out there who really shouldn't be GMs, but you've got to sit as a player. You try and get engaged and you try and encourage them because you were there at that point at one point as well. So I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely, yeah. Really cool. There's a few of these things we could possibly revisit as well. Max, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Most of the things that influenced me have already been kind of said, but I'd like to kind of maybe tighten them down a bit. So for me, one of my biggest inspirations are my brothers. So I've got 2 of them, and so my middle brother Miłosz is only 2 years younger than me. So most of my RPG playing has happened with him. Pretty much, we started at the same time, playing ever since. And the recent campaign that fizzled out was for him and his friends that I ran. And then my youngest brother, Karol, is 10 years younger. So he's kind of genuinely a different generation of player. So, for example, with my middle brother, Miłosz, we recently sat down and for numerous hours, and we want to play a Tolkien-inspired game in Arnor, sort of, the fight between Arnor and Angmar and all that. And we sat down over computer, obviously, and we listed things that should be in a Tolkien role-playing game based on his fiction. We went into things that, into broad general themes of, overcoming odds, fighting evil, being on the good side, morally good and morally black, but not black and white in the sort of like classic contrast, but also down to like sort of like brass tacks, nitty gritty sort of things. Like, for example, there's a lot of running away and hiding in Tolkien books. If you look at the Fellowship, that's, most of what they do is running away and hiding. So, conversations with my brothers, but my other brother, Karol, he is very much I would call a new school role player. He is very into it. He has an opportunities I've never had. So, for example, he goes to role playing camps, or at least he used to when he was a kid. Now he goes there as an instructor. He runs games for kids there. He's been testing a lot of like kind of new age role playing games, sort of things that are not very different than what I kind of grew up on. So not just rolling dice and going on sort of things that are very focused on story. And he's a good LARPer as well. So I think conversations with them, especially on our like little brotherly chat, are very, very inspiring.
That's cool.
That's definitely one thing. My other thing is also to do with literature, but kind of I love fantasy literature. I have loads of it. Oh, I love old British and American paperbacks, you know, those from 70s and 80s. But I think I think that a lot of role players skip because it's kind of, you know, it goes together. You're a role playing there, you like fantasy, you like science fiction, that's what you read, that's what you play, video games, that's what you watch. But there's a lot of classic literature that people forgo because they either don't have time and they're not interested. But my girlfriend is an English teacher, and her specialization, she did her master's in Gothic literature. And I think there is a vast trove of just incredible stuff in Gothic literature. Uh, because of her, I read The Monk by Matthew Lewis, and I think that's an excellent inspiration for, you know, if you want slight mystery, but also slight scandalous game. It's because, you know, it's about a monk who's very scandalous in the, I think, 18th century. And it's vivid, very brutal, because you never expect things from that old to be it. It's a great book, and I think there's so many good characters that can be brought into your games, and there's enough interesting scenes that you can be inspired by. There's even a dungeon in it, you know. So I think
Cool.
foregoing a lot of the more classic literature is kind of could be. I mean, I don't say it's something bad, but I think it's a good resource as well. And as a third thing, I would say something on a different kind of end between this kind of false dichotomy of storytelling and number crunching is I do a lot of medieval reenactment. I've done it for over a decade now. And I think a lot of inspiration can be drawn from actually watching people bash each other with swords. And this is specifically for fantasy gaming, obviously. But if you go on and watch some of the good, like big, good reenactment groups in Britain, there's a lot of them. You can get very much inspired by they have to have an element of story to what they do, so what we do. And I think that a lot of those stories can be very well translated, even on if you're doing, you know, something on a small scale. And obviously, watching people fight, especially the HEMA guys, you know, that actually try to use, well, quote unquote, proper techniques. It can be really, really impressive in your kind of sliding away from this sort of idea that a lot of role-playing games kind of get bogged down to kind of turn-based back and forth. And I'm not saying that mechanically, but I'm saying, you know, narratively, you can pick up things if you watch people. If you try to watch a 5-minute video of somebody, two guys just fighting, and try to describe it, I think you would realize how easy it will become if you do it a couple times later on if you try to describe combat to your players. So I think that that's kind of the three things that in the most recent decade kind of inspired me and been a source of information for what I do.
That's cool. So, some quite different things there. Okay, then. We'll say, you know, we saved the worst for last. Putting it off, I must admit. Yeah. Things that have inspired me. In fear of repeating. Savage Worlds is actually one of them. I remember when Savage Worlds was first coming out, and they were talking about naming settings and sort of how to sort of create sort of you know, the whole feel of the setting, and to sort of keep it sort of tight, concise, and sort of to the point. That's has stuck with me completely. Most of the settings that I come up with, the name's very important. It's sort of the you know, the blurb attached to it has to sort of get across that sort of, you know, sort of like what's it about, what's the point of the game, what can you be, but rather than reading sort of like reams and reams, it sort of, if it fits on the back of a book, great, you know. Second, one of the biggest influences is they don't exist anymore. Contested Ground Studios. they did the first edition A State hops, the what was it, Cold City and Hot War games as well. It's just the way Malcolm Craig, the guy who wrote all those, the way he had like 3 versions of the truth, and it was a case of let the GM decide what the actual truth of the situation is. That was a huge, that was a massive eye opener, because it was like, well, all that's going on behind the scenes of the setting doesn't need to be there until you need it. The big secret and the big reveal of what's really going on, what's really driving the sort of setting, doesn't necessarily have to be set in stone. Just kind of mind blowing for me, because it was like, well, it could literally be anything. I could hear something that the player says and go, "Oh, I think it's aliens. Wouldn't it be cool if it was aliens?" And then it turns out it is aliens, and everyone's happy. It works that way. The third thing, system wise, really, One Dice massively sort of influenced me, sort of not only for the simplicity, but the sort of ease of use, just to pick up, create a few characters, try out a setting. If it works, I'll do more. It sort of gave me a shot in the arm, role playing wise, because I sort of lost interest, and I wasn't really keen on what was out there. Sort of played a lot of it, got bored with it, and it was difficult to sort of find a system that I could just throw an idea at the players and just sort of think, well, should we play this kind of game? One Dice came along and changed all that. It was really cool. So yeah, that's my 3. Anyone got anything else to add?
So, question then. Throw back to the group. Do you guys find that the easier a system is, the more players will role play rather than role play?
Yeah. Like, for example, Savage Worlds.
Savage Worlds, One Dice, ICRPG, things where mechanically resolution is quite simple and quick. I find that players will role play a lot more, because they can be more narrative. They're not dependent upon a die roll determining whether they can do a backflip before they swing their sword.
Yeah.
They can just say, "This is how I'm doing it," and I think people buy into that.
I don't know, because the past 2 campaigns, the one I ran was in D&D 3.5, and I was running against the Cult of the Reptile God, which is obviously an AD&D adventure. But I just ran it for 3.5, and I remember we barely rolled dice for numerous sessions.
Okay.
And then previously, when I played in the 5th edition campaign, and obviously D&D is considered sort of like medium high crunchiness, medium high rolling, if not high. I don't think it prevented a lot of people from role playing. It certainly set the pacing of the game, and if you consider that could have, if we rolled less, we could have role played more. But I don't think it specifically was that thing. But I think it's more to do with the players themselves and the GM rather than the mechanics. Because I remember I made whenever I GM, I made it a point that I only roll dice at the very necessary when it's really necessary. Like, I make it a point that don't roll dice unless you really really have to. If I can't figure it, I as GM can't figure out what's the most likely outcome and just go with that, I will make it the player roll. And sometimes I throw a couple of rolls just because sometimes players just like to toss dice. So yeah, I think it really depends. I would be cautious to make a very kind of non-general statement, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's total sense. I think it does. I mean, I think it would help if you've got players that are sort of, dare I say, open-minded to the whole, the whole aspect of not having a rule for everything. That was one of the big turn-off points for D&D for me, because I was an absolute rules lawyer for 3.5. Savage Worlds came along, completely changed that. Showed me a different way to do things. Showed me how to role play again rather than rolling dice. Best example was a game I ran completely in a theatre, in the Rippers setting, which is quite combat based. There wasn't one single fight. It was more the social side. I think they only rolled dice once, and that was to jump off a balcony. That was it. They spent the whole 2.5 hours just talking to people. It was well, we still talk about it today. Actually, it's quite cool. And that was during the about 95 or 96, around that. So still gets talked about now. So yeah, I think it's a mixture myself.
From my point of view, I've got to say, yeah, I think really, I mean, when you look back some of the games, like me and you, Chris, have talked about older games and like how good some are. Some older games out there where the game mechanics was that, I'm going to say, complex, that like the GM had to be really, really good and knew his rules, because if you had a bunch of players who didn't know the rules very, you're constantly having to say to the GM, what have I got to do? What have I got to do here? Whereas I think sort of like in the last decade or so, there's a lot more systems out there where the system is simplistic. So therefore, there's a lot more for role playing. WFRP second edition. It's clunky, but such an easy system where the fact that role playing rather than role playing is the art, I think. I mean, I ran one game, and I think in the session, one person rolled dice in the session, but everyone just sat there talking about how to set up a camp for like a VIP camping area for a pistol shoot competition. And we role played for 3 hours and rolled one lot of dice. And then another guy I role played, I'm going to name his name actually again, guy called Michael Holt, who used to run a lot of the World of Darkness stuff, and he ran Exalted. And his background knowledge of the game was just where the fact you could just sit there and just listen to him. And you would just sit there like, wow, this is great, and he wanted that character development. He wanted that where you wanted to be part of the story. And the dice rolling was just secondary to it, to be perfectly honest with you. So, but I've got to say that the simpler the game, the more you can actually role play rather than roll the dice play.
Yeah. Okay.
If I may just add real quickly, I think if you're a GM, you can really, really tailor how much role playing you do, because if your players should really know that it's you who calls the rolls, not them. In the sense that you tell them when to roll the dice, and if you get that really sorted, if your players are, they don't jump ahead and try to roll the die ahead of time. I think that's how I play. I always call the rolls, okay, roll now for this or roll for that. I think that once it's in your hands, you can really tailor it. And I think that the players will do whatever they will do, regardless whether they will roll a lot or not. So you should really be in control of that.
I completely agree. GM should be calling for rolls. Like I say, it was only a question I was throwing out there. Do people find that sometimes a rules light system encourages a bit more role playing, or not? But ultimately, the GM is the person who's controlling the game. But sometimes you know, sometimes you do have players who just don't have that in them as well. They're not. I could sit and talk for hours. You may have gathered that, but I could just sit and role play for hours and hours and hours. But there are some players who I've gamed with who they need the dice to make that happen for them. You know, because they can't. That whole I'm going to go into the bar and I'm going to talk to the barman and see if I can find out the rumours that have been going on recently. And you know, so some of them say, right, right, here's my charisma check, and yeah, I've made a successful charisma check. What do I find out? And that's the way that they want to play the game. But I find that rules heavier games lean into that, and lighter games don't. Personal opinion.
That's quite cool. Right. I think we'll leave that there for today. Some quite interesting things. If you do like this kind of thing, you do want to join in, just message me or Aid, and like with Max, we'll find out where you live and drag you on. You know, so it's all good. So please like, subscribe, like we keep not saying. Till next time, keep rolling those dice and play those games, please.
Thank you.